All right, so we will have a word of prayer and turn it over to Matthew here. You come on up, yeah, if you want to use your laptop for your notes and stuff, that's fine. All right, let's pray. Thank you, Father, for the encouraging message this morning. Thank you that we're not opening random doors and being surprised by zonks and things like that are discouraging and humiliating. We thank you that we give our lives to the Lord Jesus Christ. He uses us. You take delight in using us, and your Spirit directs us. Thank you for that reminder. Pray for Matthew as he shares this morning and as we continue our discussion. Christ to be honored. In Jesus' name. All right, my friend. That is all. Use the keyboard to advance or whatever you want there.
Use the keyboard, you said? I just want to see if it worked.
Click the mouse on the actual slide and see what happens. You might have to use the keys.
I'm using the wrong. That hopefully is the right slide too.
Yeah.
Wait, I click this one.
Yeah, you click. Okay,
Perfect.
but that should work now. Does it? Yeah. There you go.
Perfect. We're good.
Cool. Yeah.
As you can see, I'm doing David Livingston today. I'm going to be talking about there's a ton of information about him. I'll just highlight a few things. I'm also going to talk about his wife a little bit, talk about their marriage, their family, and then talk about what was his impact on world missions altogether.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I got the right up. Okay, so his birth, he was born in March 19th, 1813. He was born in Glasgow, Scotland. His childhood, so he didn't really come from a wealthy background. He grew up in a one-room tenement factory town outside Glasgow. He had 5 other siblings. He began working at age 10. He worked in a mill. I know we talked about that in class, so that's a little bit of review. His job specifically at the mill, it wasn't too specific in the book, but they said he was a piercer. So basically he put threads together, and he was doing this on a spinning frame. So I assumed he was making some type of material for clothing maybe, or something around those lines. It was kind of vague, so I'm kind of just making an inference based on that. Something that was kind of review also, we talked about in our class a little bit. He had a call originally to go to China. And while reading the 25 Marriage book, it talked specifically about basically how that happened. So basically, it wasn't really too specific, but basically there was a missionary. He was handing out tracts, and specifically with a request to have medical missions. And from that, it gave David direction on his life. It wasn't generally specific. I don't know if it's the Lord was calling him to that, it was just calling him direction. I think that might have been how I gave him direction. Upon doing that, he began to go to Glasgow Medical School. As mentioned earlier, he wanted to pursue medical missions. He quit his job at the mill while in medical school, I'm pretty sure, and he was at the mill for 12 years. So he started working at 10 to 12, now he's 22. It's a really long time. Upon graduating from medical school, he applied at London's Mission Society, or London Mission Society, the missions agency that we've talked about numerous times. He applied with the intent to go to China. And I thought it was interesting. It said he was accepted on probation. And the reason for that was he didn't really have a lot of the theological education that was necessary. I didn't think he'd be able to comprehend that at a college level. So that was interesting. And then also, I don't have it written down specifically on my notes, but I remember reading it talked about in 1849, there was some type of war that broke out in China. And because of that, the London Mission Society decided not to send missionaries there. So then his opportunity to China was not really available anymore. Talking about his personality, most of these I have down are kind of negative, but obviously not all his personality was negative. I know it's obvious he did have some personality issues, but he does have good qualities as well. When reading the 25 Marriage book, it mentioned that the Moffat family describes about him. He's considered to have a roughness and bluntness. Ironically, the family he later had issues with thought this was a good quality about him that would make him a great fit for him and their mission society, their mission base out in, I'm going to butcher this, but it's Curemont. I don't know how to say it, but
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, is what it is, but yeah. So basically, upon graduating medical school, he was sent out there. He was their doctor there on their mission base. Actually, that's ahead of time, but whatever. I'll talk about that more later. Another thing to describe about him, he was very like stubborn. Like he wanted his own ideas. He didn't like taking orders from others. He was oftentimes like considered difficult to work with. Another thing I thought it's kind of interesting, but as we've studied more and more missionaries, it's very common loneliness. On his first journey to South Africa, when he's studying the language, in the 25 marriage books, it talked about how like he would try to write to people, and like obviously back then, writing back and forth it would take extremely long time. So because of that, there was not really a great lot of dialogue. And going into missions, he had no desire to be married, even though several people suggested that he should get married because doing mission work in a foreign country by yourself is often lonely. So after being in South Africa 3 years, the language barrier came to the conclusion that he did actually want to have a wife or pursue a relationship with someone. This is kind of like not super important, but actually, I'm on the wrong. I need to actually switch slides, so that'd be helpful. Okay, so how did David meet his wife Mary? He met his future wife at the Kuruman mission station. David had been severely ill, and he was sent back there. So before that, which I talked about, so basically what happened was he had some issues with the Moffat family, or not issues, or he decided to leave. He goes to Maya Boatsta. Basically, there's a guy named Roger Edwards, and his life. They're at the same missions base as the Moffat family. They left, and David went with them. But while doing that mission, or going with them, we talked about this in class. He went into like I don't know what to call it, safari. He was with a group of Africans there, and they went into the jungle. A lion bit him in his arm, and because of that injury, it caused him to become ill. So basically, once he becomes he's ill, he's there getting treated. Once he gets better, then he goes back to the Moffat place, which then that's where he's able to meet Mary. So basically, he suffered from an injury. He's come back. Mary was his nurse. At this time, Mary was 23 and he was 30 years old, so a little bit of an age gap, but not terribly. And then 3 months later, they were engaged. They were married January 2nd in 1845 in Kuruman. Okay, so a little bit about his mission area, or what he did for missions, or kind of some highlights. There's obviously had a lot of places he went to, a lot of places he discovered and went deeper into Africa. I'm just going to highlight a few. So as we know, he worked with the mission station, the Moffats in Kuruman. He came as a medical doctor. It was around 1840, so kind of like I mentioned earlier. He left in 1843. He joined the Edwards in Mabosta. I'm totally butchering that, but it is what it is. Basically, kind of the same, well, not the same thing, but kind of a theme. He had some issues with them, so after some disputes with disputes with Edwards, David moved his family to Cullenberg, and this was their home for 4 years. And then after that, I wasn't able to get like a perfect exact timeline. Basically, after that, he started going on more explorations, and his goal was to get deeper and deeper into Africa. And then this is kind of an odd transition, but kind of towards the end of his life, what was his death, like what happened? So he died at age 60. I don't know how accurate this date is, but he died on May 1st, 1873, and he died in the Zambian swamps. So a little bit about Mary Livingstone. I don't have a ton of information about her. This is a picture of her. I tried finding a younger picture, but that's all really Google had about her. So
That's all I've ever seen.
yeah, there's a picture of her right there. So a little bit about her personality. From reading the 25 marriage books, I talked about she was amiable and had a good temper. A little bit about her childhood. I think we may have talked about this a little bit in class. She was raised in a mud hut. She was the oldest daughter of David and Mary Moffat. She lived in Kuruman for most of her life before meeting David, and obviously they went on to their different explorations. This is more kind of just like a generalization or observation about her. She's considered like independent. She knew how to make her own clothes, bread, candles, and soap. She understood missionary life, and she was a nurse, which I already talked about. So those are kind of some of her skills or traits she brought. I think something that also is like can't really not talk about when describing Mary Livingstone. She suffered from a lot of illness. Specifically, she suffered from paralysis for several weeks. That happened on their first voyage, or exploration into Africa. and the right side of her face became motionless. She experienced right side. So she experienced not only her face became motionless on the right side, but she had pain on her right side and right leg as well. And as she continued to go on these explorations, her paralysis worsened, and so that's kind of just a little bit about the illness she dealt with. So their marriage and family life, I didn't get a ton of information exactly on their marriage, but kind of like some time during missionaries during that time, it wasn't necessarily romantic. It was more of hey, I need to fulfill my ministry. I believe coming alongside you will help me do that. But it did say that their marriage did possess love for one another. Obviously, they had lots of frustrations, and there was some division about him going on these explorations, him taking the family, and some strain with the Moffat family. So by any means, it was not a perfect marriage. They did have 5 children, and the 4th child died soon after being born due to sickness. That picture, I don't know if that's when they had 4 children exactly, or if that's after the 5th one died, but that just shows their 4 children and them right there together. There's David and his wife right there. So kind of wrap up, what was David Livingstone's impact on missions? I found this in the 25 marriage or missionary marriage, whatever it's called, but I'm talking about. It says, even though David saw one African declare his faith in Christ in 6 years of being a missionary, which that's I don't know, it's almost defeating, but also it's wow. But then looking at his grand scheme, what his mission impact was, it says greatest contribution to missions was opening up Africa's interior to other missionaries. He discovered the Zambezi, which is the river, was actually you're able to get from there to the Indian Ocean, and it provided future missionaries with an easier way to get into Central Africa. So granted, I was kind of wrapping up, yes, he only was according to the book, he was only a missionary fully for 6 years, but his overall impact, it did have a lasting impact. I think it was in one of his biographies or letters, it talked about how he was reflecting on his mission's impact and just saying that yes, I didn't see a lot of converts, but for future missions work, he was kind of laying the groundwork. Yeah, that's all I got.
Good, thanks, man. Good job. Yeah, it's a ton of stuff. His marriage was rocky, and he did feel remorse at the end for maybe not having spent more time with her. But I think overall, they did all right. Yeah. Yeah, I've always heard the name of the Moffat's place called Kuruman. Yeah, but who knows? It's an African word we're trying to translate.
Yeah, I should pronounce. We're at least looking up how to pronounce.
Mobasta is probably as good as any. You hear an African pronounce it, that'd be quite different. But yeah, good. Did you enjoy the chapter?
Yeah, it was good. This is sad. I literally got it yesterday because I thought I had it.
Oh.
So I had to Amazon Prime
Wow.
ship it.
Oh man!
So
You could have borrowed mine if I'd have known that, man.
Yeah, I didn't ask either, so probably would have.
25 surprising words. In fact, I think actually I may have put one on reserve or library. Can't remember. I think maybe I did. Yep, it was Dr. Heron that introduced me to that book. All right, good. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Let's see. Who's on next? Yeah, Laurel on the 10th. Right, or wait a minute. 13th. Yep. So for Friday, yeah, we'll have another quiz and you read chapter 7 of the book. And yeah, it's just a different angle. Looking at the marriage angle of that is kind of cool. It's a little different than what you normally find in a missions history book. So very, very good. All right. Let's see. This computer's working a little slowly today for some reason. All right. Yeah, it's just being a bit of that over here. All right. Okay, where did we stop? We were talking about the opening of the 20th century. We get through all that. Do you remember where we ended up on
We
that?
stopped on the slide with Betsy Stockton.
Okay, good, right there. All right. Yeah, single women missionaries. Look, this is an ongoing debate. When you come from circles like ours that say women shouldn't be pastors, then the big questions that come up have to do with the question of authority. And yet we cannot deny that God has used single missionaries, in ministries. And they wrestled and had differences of opinion regarding how much authority a woman can have. There are stories of single women starting churches. They evangelize, people come to Christ. Now all of a sudden, do we have a church? And if we do, none of those new converts are able to lead. So what's the woman do? Can she preach to them? Well, I won't call it a church. We'll just call it a Bible study. I mean, just lots and lots of things to think about. So this started really in the 1820s. You might think, well, what year was the suffrage movement in the U.S.? It was 1920, about 100 years after this. So, the movement of women and their role in missions and in society isn't something that happened just in the 1900s. But Betsy Stockton had actually been a slave, former slave. She was the first overseas single missionary from America that we know of. 1823, she went to Hawaii. And,
Wait, can you-
I'm sorry.
What do you mean the first overseas single missionary?
As far as we know, she's the first single missionary to be sent out from America. Okay? And
A single missionary or single woman missionary?
that's a good question. I may have missed. Hold on. See it in the book there? Let's see. I never noticed that before. Let's take a look here.
Because I thought there were single missionaries who went out before.
Yeah, hang on a sec here. Um, um, all right, let's see. Betsy Stockton was the first unmarried Protestant woman from America to serve as missionary. Yeah, woman. Thank you. I never noticed that before. So I'm going to just change single female missionary. Let's put it that way. Okay. There we go. That better? Thank you. Yeah. Tucker quotes Robert Linder, and he says, in essence, okay, this is going back to higher criticism, which was creeping in at this time. It's stripped Christianity of its supernatural elements, especially its miracles and the deity of Christ, and taught instead what it considered to be the essential Christian virtues of the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, the necessity of living in love. All sounds really nice and cozy, but it's just not true. The Bible, historically, the authority for faith and practice in the Protestant churches was no longer considered trustworthy, but embracing errors and contradictions. And so, if you're heading down this path, then your view of women missionaries becomes basically one of egalitarianism. They can do whatever men can do. So, anyway, Stockton, there are several examples she gives in the book there, and Betsy Stockton was because she was the first woman single missionary. You all know this lady, Lottie Moon. Does anybody happen to remember how tall she was?
Mhm. Was she even 5 foot?
No. She was 4'3". I mean, she was like a China doll. In China, she'd fit right in. But, okay, so her full name was Charlotte Diggs Moon. Okay. We know her as Lottie. Okay. She was born in 1840 in Virginia. So what side of the war would her family have been on?
South?
Yeah, her family actually was involved in the Confederate cause. Well, how could that be? There were no Christians in the South, right?
No,
In
they're
fact,
Christians all over.
There were probably more Christians in the South than in the North in general. The the southern part of our country was probably a higher percentage of Christian influence than even the north. Yeah. I had a missionary colleague in Brazil who flew the Confederate flag in Brazil in his house. He was pretty radical. His dad also drove a motorcycle from Brazil all the way to the United States, including up through the Panama Canal.
What?
Yeah, crazy man. It was an interesting family. She grew up in a Christian home, and she had two siblings who became medical doctors. So, you get the impression right away that she was from a pretty solid, pretty capable household. But how often do we read this? She rebelled against the Lord during college. Who else? Give me another example of somebody that rebelled during college years or right around that time of life. Christian home, but rebelling during that period.
I don't know. It's whatever guy heard someone crying in the
Yeah,
hospital.
who was that? Ednam Judson, right. Yeah, it's interesting. Why do you suppose that is such a vulnerable time for people and so many people start questioning God and things during the collegiate years? Why would that be?
Some of them, if they grew up maybe really sheltered because the parents wanted to protect them, then they go to college and then they see things and they experience things. It's like the world's kind of opening up. And so they might be tempted away because they've never seen or heard of any of these things before.
Yeah. You guys are going to face this as parents. How do you know how much to shelter your children? You all come from Christian homes. Is it a Christian home, Matt?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
Like divided, but yeah.
Okay. My mom was a Christian. My dad wasn't for a long time. Yeah. How much do you shelter them? And there are differences of opinion. I would say this. Maybe better than the word sheltered is the word insulation. Isolation is usually not a good thing. Insulation is, because insulation still exposes them to the elements, whereas isolation doesn't. And I don't know, and I don't want to speak out of turn here and offend anybody, but if our children never are exposed to the world around us, that sooner or later they will be. And unfortunately, many times when that happens, they're not really prepared to deal with it because they haven't been trained to do that. So, there's a lot of talk about whether students should go to public schools or Christian schools or homeschool or, or whatever. And every parent has to, I don't know what her home life was like in that way. But she was transformed through a campus revival that was taking place where she went to school, and God got a hold of her heart there. So she goes to China. I mean, there's never anything but China for Lottie Moon. She's China all the way. So Livingston wanted to go to China, right? He ended up going to Africa, right? And we'll talk about A.B. Simpson that wanted to go to China, ended up not going at all, and yet he becomes one of the main, he becomes a hero in the missionary movement. So God just does a lot of, he had a sister named Edmonia, call it Ed for short, no, I don't know much. And she went first, and then Edmonia went first, and then Lottie came along after. When you study Lottie Moon, you don't normally hear anything about her sister. But her sister actually went before her, and then she went later. But things didn't go so well. Edmonia returned home after 4 years. She just did not adjust well. And she complained, and they fought and everything. And yet when she went home, Lottie cried. She missed her, even though they fought all the time. You guys get that, right? Look back, you fought with your siblings, and now you cry when you go. My brother and I, and we fought. He was a year and a half older than I. He still is. And lives in Colorado. I could not get anywhere close to his friends or his life. It might have been the year and a half. It might as well have been 18 years apart. And yet now he supports me. Sends money. We call it every Sunday. We talk. Totally different experience. Well, she had some personal struggles. She was bored. living alone in China, long winters there, you know, and she just, it's not that she didn't have anybody to look up to. Ha ha ha. That was a joke. Oh boy, here we go. Romance. She met a guy named Crawford Toy. I'd like to marry somebody with the last name of Toy. That'd be interesting. And what did he offer her?
Marriage.
Marriage. Yeah, yeah. And she came very close to accepting. So why didn't she marry the guy?
Because of his theological beliefs.
Yeah, he had been influenced by the things that we mentioned here and talked about last week or a week before, I guess, or whatever. Right. And so she ended up seeing, you know, he was buying into evolution and stuff, and very brilliant guy, but she saw that she couldn't marry him. She really had a hard time with male authority. Not that she wasn't opposed to male authority. She was opposed to for not allowing women to exercise authority. Remember we talked about Maud Carey? She wrestled with that too. Remember, in fact, some people tried to get Maud out of there because she was always pushing the envelope, you know, and trying to. And Lottie had trouble with that too. She struggled with. She was very, very strong-willed, very capable. All these ladies that go, these single gals, one of the things they have in common is they're all very capable. Otherwise, they would never make it as single ladies, you know. And so they started this thing called Women's Work, you know, for women in China, to try and kind of define the parameters. Where can women serve? And by the way, what movement was she with? Lottie Moon was with what organization? She was with the Southern Baptists. And even today, there's still a Lottie Moon Christmas offering every year. If you go online, you'll see it. I think I may have a link to that coming up here. So what did she end up doing? Well, she ended up teaching. She did not want to be a teacher. So she had 40 students, and she called them unstudious girls. One thing that may have happened, okay, I don't know if this was the case, but China, the Eastern world in general, okay, out of respect for the teacher, you know where I'm going with this, what'll happen?
They would pretend to know
They pretend to know.
what she was talking about.
Yeah, why?
Because that's how the Asian culture, the warm or cold cultures, they don't want to offend the teacher.
Right. Yeah, if you raise your hand and say, could you explain that again? I didn't get it. You might as well be saying, hey, yeah, you didn't do a very good job teaching today. Could you do that again? Try better. That's basically how it would come across to an Asian teacher. So here she is, you know, they're not responding, they look lethargic, but the fact is they may be paying really close attention. And if they don't know something, will they go up to the teacher after class and ask her? What do?
Ask each other.
Yeah, find the smart person in the class and ask them. Really interesting. We do just the opposite here. If nobody ever asked me a question in class, I'm thinking, you know, I'm a failure as a teacher. And I like it, you know, in Roman, we're talking in Romans class right now about Romans 9 through 11. See, you're in Romans.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I like the interaction. It shows that students are thinking. But in Asia, like you said, Sharon, they kind of assume that they're thinking, right? She resented the limitations placed on women. Okay, but to her credit, she lived with it. Let me ask you this, did Lottie Moon believe that women should be pastors? No, she didn't. So what would be the resentment?
I think maybe more in like that time and that culture, there was just a lot more restrictions placed on women.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it was just over that, I guess.
Okay, yeah, the Chinese culture would have had some pretty strict standards for women in society. And I think that a lot of the women, even though they didn't, her theology was pretty good. But I think that they sometimes felt like their opinions weren't even appreciated. You know, when they made decisions, if there was voting going on or anything among the people in the mission station, the women didn't vote. And I think that a lot of times, if the men had recognized that the women have some really good opinions and really good ideas, that would have softened the blow a lot for some of them. But a woman would have an idea, and the man would say, "You leave that to us. Go back to your ironing." You know what I'm saying? Just that sort of thing. And that bothered them. So I think that the men perhaps were at fault to some degree by not valuing, in this book you guys are reading. I mean, man, how many of these wives just, really had some great ideas, very valuable. And the women didn't often receive the same salary. Because remember, she's part of the Southern Baptist Convention, so they don't raise support. It's not a faith mission. So the society, the mission society is paying out, and the women didn't get as much. Do you think they should have?
Wasn't there like some like single missionary women like, hey, like I'm going by myself, like why is a man who goes by himself getting more money? Or
Okay, yes, Lester, she went by herself up in the heart of Africa more. Yeah, the thinking of the agency, the society was the men who are the decision makers, the movers and shakers should be making more than the support team. The women were considered more like a support team. So it's kind of like you have your starters and you have your subs, right? And who's going to make the most money? Starters are. See, and so the women felt like they were being, looked upon as second-class missionaries, lesser pay, their opinions, they might have some good opinions, but. And so she and others fought for, because even though they didn't have the same decision-making power, they were still working their fingers to the bone, really. And they didn't think it was fair that they should work so hard, still not get paid. So there was some legitimate arguments there. But there was another guy whose name was T.P. Crawford. Now, it's easy to mix him up with Crawford Toy. You got T. Crawford and Crawford T. So Crawford Toy, he was the leader of the group there in their mission station. Yeah.
this is kind of random on that side. Oh, you talked about like a faith. Would you call it a faith-based mission?
This one wasn't.
This one wasn't. So like, is it wrong like for missionaries to be paid by agency, or should it be like race support? Or
There's nothing in the Bible that,
Yeah,
that stipulates that. I would say that from a practical standpoint, Matthew, there's some really neat advantages in raising your own support. You get closer to your churches. You go there, you visit them, and you expose them to missions, in a way that maybe others wouldn't. And the whole deputation process of raising support is really a time of growing and learning. But there's nothing unbiblical about the way they're doing it here. Where I draw the line is she authorized by her home church? Because agencies, at least my understanding in the New Testament, agencies, parachurch organizations are not the authority in a minister's life, missionary, pastor, whatever, it's the local church. And the Southern Baptist Convention really is strong on the authority of the local church. They really are. So yeah, I don't think it's wrong. No. But he was domineering, this guy. He called shots. And I'm guessing it wasn't just the single ladies that had problems with him. Probably some of his male colleagues got a little upset with him too. But he had a wife. He was the field director. He was opposed to mission schools. And guess what? She was teaching in a mission school. So she did not have his support. So here she is, poor thing. These 40 students feel like, she feels like they're bored to tears. And the director of he's against the whole idea of having a mission school. So she has 2 strikes against her already. Come on, who wouldn't struggle with that? You know what I'm saying? Her struggle was legit, but to her credit, she didn't give up and go home. He was dictatorial, ask his wife. She admitted it, This is a kind of a funny sidelight. Were you guys at the banquet Thursday night? I don't know if y'all were able to be there at the banquet. Okay. Were you able to be there, Matthew?
no.
Okay. Dr. Steve Taylor got up, and how animated he was. And afterwards, his wife said to my wife, he just yelled the whole time. I said, Steve, you're just yelling the whole time. She got embarrassed. I thought he was very excited, and I wasn't offended at all. He was just really passionate about what he said, but his wife thought he was just yelling the whole time, honey. But he regulated the mission salary. So there's the 3rd strike, okay? She doesn't like teaching. He doesn't like the school. And so he's not going to, look, if he's not in favor of mission schools, how much is he going to pay her to teach at one of them? You know what I'm saying? Just everything was against her. And there are a lot of people in ministry who actually end up quitting because they just don't think these things are fair. They can't deal with them, and they end up leaving. She did not. Now, who called her a woman devil? Was it Crawford? No. Where'd she get that reputation? It wasn't the missionaries. It was the nationals. There's a book out written many years ago, back in the 70s, I think, called Foreign Devil in China. Because the Boxer Rebellion and all that stuff surrounding that, many Chinese viewed Westerners as foreign devils because they were trying to dismantle their own culture. And so, she was labeled, she got lumped in with everybody else. She was considered a foreign devil, a woman devil. Okay, not because so much of her doctrine, but because of her nationality. She was a Westerner. But there were some signs of fruit. In 1887, 14 years into their work, she started seeing some signs of fruit there. Let me get that open here. All right. By the way, I'm skipping over some of these. They're all interesting, but okay. All right. It says on page 297, only slowly and after weary persistence did she win friends among the women. And even then, it was difficult to make an impact on women until she had won the confidence of the men. That's interesting. Okay. Then the next paragraph says her first opportunity to reach Chinese men came in 1887 when 3 strangers from a nearby village appeared at her door in Pingtu. They had heard the new doctrine being whispered about by women and were eager for her to tell them more. So you gotta understand, these are men, right? So they're not gonna come to her in broad daylight. It's kind of like Nicodemus going to Jesus at night, because they didn't want to be seen. And God had been working in their hearts, and they came and talked to her about it. And she says that she visited their village, where she found something I'd never seen before in China, such eagerness to learn, such spiritual desires. So excited was she that she canceled plans for a long overdue furlough and summoned Martha Crawford, the wife of T.P. Crawford. Sorry, I lost my spot here. And to come and help her. Their efforts were rewarded. She wrote home, surely there could be no deeper joy than that of saving souls. Despite local opposition, she established a church. Interesting. And in 1889, the first baptisms were conducted. Now, notice this, by an ordained Baptist missionary. So yeah, she did start a church, but she didn't go baptizing believers and make herself the pastor. She recognized this was a man's responsibility, and so she did bring a man to do that. And when it comes to organizing a church, this is where it gets really, really murky. And that's why I always would encourage people, single gals, to join team ministry when there's a man, so that these types of things can happen. And those are 3 strangers we talked about, salvation of souls in Pingtu, where she was. She canceled a much needed furlough. She invited Martha Crawford to help, and they established a church. The first converts were baptized by an ordained Baptist missionary. And the church grew to over 1,000 people in the next 20 years. That's pretty impressive. It's China. Okay. Oops, sorry. Let me go back there for you. Okay. So, God gave her some unusual fruit. There's a saying in missions that, most missionaries who drop out do so during their first term of service. A term used to be typically 4 years. If a missionary makes it through the first term, successfully, then they go back, then normally they will stick it out. It's that first term. And it's not necessarily even culture shock. Her problem is not culture shock, okay? It was the leadership of the American missionaries and, her inability to be able to use her talents and things. She felt like she's being stifled. So this wasn't a culture shock issue for her. Wasn't the language. As far as we know, she learned the Mandarin Chinese language fairly well. Finances are often the reason why people end up not coming back. You know, they don't have enough support or whatever. But she stuck with it, and God gave her fruit. And look, would Lottie Moon have ever even imagined that in 2023, her name would still be associated with the Southern Baptist Convention, that there would be an annual Christmas offering in memory of her? I mean, the convention's not going to do that if she was a loser, right? The fact that her name is still on their site and still promoted every year is a testimony to her faithfulness and perseverance. So, but she would never have guessed that. In fact, probably most of these missionaries that we study would probably never have imagined that someday, you know, we'd be mentioning them as key historians, you know. Just amazing. All right. Well, she does change ministries in 1890, which is the year my grandmother was born, my mom's mom. 1890, and she spent the next 22 years in that. So what did she do? She divided her time between village evangelism and teaching and writing in Tengzhou. She was a writer. We're going to talk about one of the most prolific writers of all the single missionaries, which would be whom? We haven't studied her yet, but you'll know her. Who wrote a lot?
Amy.
Yeah, Amy Carmichael. But Lottie also wrote, and she did village evangelism. That's kind of where, you know, these people came to Christ. And then you have the annual Christmas offering. Let me just click on that real quick. That's just a website just to show you. All right, there it is. Lottie Moon Christmas offering. I mean, this IMB, International Mission Board, that's the Southern Baptist Convention, right? Your gifts support gospel transmission. Down. There's a history. What is Lottie Moon Christmas offering? And so, you know, there's a little synopsis of her ministry. I mean, it's just really cool. If she had given up and gone home, you know, earlier on, you know, and not that knowing her name, remembering her name is any big deal, but I'm just saying, to her credit, she stuck it out. All right. And then, women's work for women. She started really promoting things that, you know, women could do and helping women get involved and that sort of thing. But there's kind of a tragic end to her life. This is really sad. The Boxer Rebellion, of course, took place what year? Easy number to remember.
1800.
1900. Right? You only 100 years old. That's okay. So remember, so this ministry was 1890 to 1912. So right in the middle of that is the Boxer Rebellion. And of course, as you know, many national believers were killed. Missionaries, some were killed or imprisoned. And a lot of giving went down. People couldn't even get money to them. It was a bad time. And then she finds out that her sister, remember her sister that had left the field, gone home after 4 years, she committed suicide. I think she shot herself, if I remember correctly. I mean, just think about that. And even though they've been separated for a long time, it's just really, really. And Lottie actually went into depression. She took it so personally that she went into a depression and tried to starve herself to death, or attempt to starve herself to death. Think about that.
Wasn't that like, I don't know. The book made it sound a little bit more like a mix between her not really wanting to die, but like she was giving away food because she used all her funds up and other people were not eating enough.
That may have been part of it, but I think that what really drove it was depression. Yeah, because when you think about it, if you're not struggling with depression, you know, you find a way to eat. She actually wanted to starve herself. Yeah, and so I'm sure there were a lot of factors involved, but I think probably what was driving it more than anything else was her sister's suicide. The events when the Boxer Rebellion took place. The church in China really, really suffered numerically, and many people went back. You know, they left the church because of the pressure from political, you know, events and all that. It was a tough time, but yeah, I'm sure she probably didn't save enough even when she could have. And they tried to get her out of it. They tried to get her to eat and all that, but she ended up passing away on Christmas Eve of 1912.
I was looking her up earlier, it says she weighed 50 pounds at her death.
Yeah, well, she was only 4'3" to begin with, so she was probably only about 90 pounds even when she was healthy, right? If you look at pictures of her, she's pretty thin, I think. Yeah, 50 pounds, imagine that, when she died. And, you know, just, it was a tough life. It really was. Who was it that spoke in chapel, Troy Manning, yesterday? You know, listing the things in Paul's life that were challenges for him. Yeah. So anyway, well, we'll get to Amy next time around. But Lottie Moon, give her a lot of credit. She stuck it out. She worked hard to serve the Lord, and she was faithful. The end there, tough, but we're not going to pull the rug out from under her because of that. All right. Good. Thanks, Matthew. Good job in your report. You guys have a good day.